My name is Anthony Kazazis, and I am the director of the NYC Network Group, as well as the NYC Real Estate Expo. And I want to welcome you all for coming on board today and hearing a group which is comprised of Brian Phillips, Tywan Anthony, and Derek Hall. And their new group is called $1 Million Thinking, which is exciting. And their topic today is living and working together in New York City's post-pandemic. Before we actually get started, many of you out there are inquiring about the Expo, and the Expo this year is to be held at the New York Hilton on November 2nd. However, if COVID-19 is still active and it does come back in the fall, then we do have an alternate date, which will be in June 23rd. So without further ado, I'd like to read off the bios of our speakers today. We're going to start off with Brian Phillips. Brian Phillips has been an associate broker with Douglas Elliman in the past 13 years and is licensed in both Harlem as well as the Bronx and Riverdale offices. Brian has been in the business of selling and leasing homes and real property for over 23 years. He is best known by his moniker, the Mobile Broker, as he covers several counties, including Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, Westchester. Brian is also a member of the Real Estate Board of New York and One Key MLS. Welcome, Brian Phillips. Tywan Anthony. Tywan Anthony is a commercial property manager and has managed over 6 million square feet of commercial and residential properties throughout his career. Ty is also an adjunct instructor at Baruch College teaching real estate. In addition, he holds several industry licenses and certifications, such as the CPM Candidate Designation from the Institute of Real Estate Management. He completed the Real Estate Associate Program from REAP, currently is a licensed real estate broker, and has recognized in the Top 100 magazine in 2019. Locally, has been a long-serving member of his community board and is the founder of a nonprofit, New York Crusaders, where he actively plays adult tackle football. Welcome, Tywan.
Thank you.
Or Ty. I'm sorry, Ty.
Ty is
Derek
fine.
Hall.
Ty is fine.
Ty is good. Derek Hall. Derek is the president of Charter Real Estate School, known as also CNYRES. He hopes to enact a genuine change in the way the real estate professionals approach their continuing education requirements, pioneering the concept of education as a service, known as EAS as well. The goal is to provide engaging and relevant course topics, while also helping to introduce new apps, technology, and software to the industry. It all began 15 years ago as PropertyShark.com, where he focused on property data in the research sector. Welcome, Derek Hall. And without further ado, I also would like to introduce to you right now, Derek Hall as your host. Derek?
Thank you very much, Anthony. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here to the inaugural episode of $1 Million Thinking. And I want to give a special thanks and appreciation to Anthony for giving us this opportunity to have this show. I think it's a great forum. It's going to be a great format. We're looking forward to having some great discussions here on $1 Million Thinking, Ty, Brian, and I. And we're definitely looking forward to having the live version when we get to the actual expo. So that's going to be something that we're looking forward to. We hope all of you will come with us on this journey as we have these episodes once a month leading up to the actual expo. So definitely looking forward to the future we all have together. We have with us today our guest, Paul Gottsegen, and he's here through connections with Ty. So Ty, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about Paul?
Sure. Thank you for that, Derek. Anthony, again, thank you also for giving us this platform. So we have Paul. Paul has been a good friend of mine for a while, and he's a member of IREM, which is the Institute for Real Estate Management. And I'll let Paul get into a little bit about what IREM does, but I'll just say my personal, my personal connection to Paul and to the organization. If anyone is in the property management space, I would say that, and I'm pretty sure IREM would like this as well, but IREM is hands down one of the best property management organizations here in New York City. I became acquainted with IREM, just wanting to be a better property manager and understand policy and what's happening here in the real estate space. So with that being said, I'll let Paul introduce himself, talk about his background, and also a little bit of what IREM does. So I'll put a little plug, and I'm pretty sure Paul will. But if we don't have members of IREM, become a member. So Paul, you could take it away.
Hey, thanks, Tywan. So first of all, let me just say a little bit about myself. I'm currently the chairman of New Yorkers for Parks, which is a not-for-profit that champions open space and parkland within New York's 5 boroughs, across the 5 boroughs. But before that, I spent the bulk of my career being president and director of management of a Halstead Management Company for 16 years. We managed 23,000 co-op condo and rental units. And after that, I spent a couple of years working in commercial. So I have a fairly good idea of the landscape. Yes, I am a CPM, which is a certified property manager, which is a designation given by the Institute of Real Estate Management. And let me just tell you a bit about IREM. IREM gives a couple of designations, a few actually. It gives the CPM, Certified Property Manager. It gives the Accredited Residential Manager, and it gives the Accredited Commercial Managers designations. It is I would say, the leading organization in property management nationwide. Mm-hmm. And I really suggest people check it out for education and prestige. Of course, it has other things like certain facts that if you are a CPM, your income is, over twice as much as what other people make and things like that. So there's definitely benefits involved. I would suggest people check out Institute of Real Estate Management.
Definitely. And I'm sorry, just to interject and just to add a little bit to that as well, to what Paul said, right? We have, if you're a vendor, if you're a broker, or if you're an agent, or whatever you are in the real estate industry, IREM offers networking opportunities as well. I know for me personally, joining IREM has been amazing. I've been able to meet great people like Paul and knowledgeable folks there as well. So, if you are interested in that space, get a membership. And then plus Paul can tell you better than I, at the end of the year, we have a pretty cool gala event that you get to dress up and eat some good food and have good drinks. So that's also a benefit too.
So that's great. So that means you guys will be uniquely suited for this conversation, and I'm looking forward to you doing double duty, Ty. So we're going to be talking about, what the future of the city is going to be with regards to our rental buildings moving forward in our post-COVID-19 environment. And I think it's an important discussion to have as we're reopening, so that people have a better understanding, whether you're in the industry or you're working with clients, particularly you want to know what that experience is going to be like. This is a good conversation to be having about what are the changes we can expect to see in our buildings, because I remember when we were preparing for this, one of the conversations we had, particularly Ty, you and I, we were talking about how permanent this was going to be. Because I was thinking, hey, this is only going to be a little bit of time, then we're going to be good. And I think you were more of the that this is going to be permanent. Some of the changes that we're coming down with are going to stay with us moving forward. And I think it's important to discuss those things.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason why, I think is going to be permanent. So, for example, here at the house, right, every time I come home, the wife is like, stop at the door, take everything off, no COVID, right? So I think as we, especially in myself being in the commercial space, you start to see tenants requesting certain things, right, that you haven't seen tenants requesting before, due to the fact that just to abide by social distancing rules and just to make sure that, most importantly, that their employees feel safe. So I think that's one of the most important things. I know Paul has, probably seen or heard some things in his experience as well.
Well, certainly. I mean, all landlords today, well, and I want to sort of speak about the commercial sector right now. I don't know how many people in the audience right now are specifically on commercial, but commercial landlords have spent a lot of time thinking about reopening and what that's going to look like. And if you go to the major sites, if you go to, C&W and Knight Frank and all the big guys, and also IREM, they have all basically come out with manuals, which are very excellent. They've come out with real protocols on what to specifically do with real checklists and of exactly how you would open a commercial building. And a lot of them have to do with traffic flow, of course, increased sanitation, increased cleaning on a regular basis, and training for its staff. So all of these things are in practice now. It does remain to be seen how comfortable people will feel in terms of actually going back to the office. Just because the landlords, or should I say property owners, are instituting these measures doesn't mean that people will feel comfortable working back in the office. That has not been figured out yet. They don't really know what's going to happen with that, and that's an important consideration.
Yeah, of course. And Derek, and just to also topple that, so for me, most of the commercial properties that I manage are open air shopping centers, right? So, and we have, class A, class B, so we have different classes throughout the spectrum. So, and I'll just give a quick example. Paul mentioned foot traffic. So I went to my property the other day, actually, and I noticed that we have a couple of restaurants in some of our open air shopping centers, and we have a fire lane there. And I noticed that now this particular restaurant, they were coming out of their establishment and doing grab and go service, right? But they were blocking the fire lane. So what we've decided to implement is actually have permanent grab and go parking spots. And we know traditionally your big box tenants, your Targets, your Home Depots, they have had this already. But what we've rolled out is a campaign to let our tenants know, you know what, we do care and we understand. So we've embarked on a campaign where we're going to take our regular parking spots and we're going to paint those and designate those only for grab and go, right? So now, and it's funny because we're doing it this week and tenants are calling me and they're saying, hey, property manager, things are getting a little busy here. Cars are kind of piled up. So what we're going to do now, a customer, if you ordered food, you would be able to come to that designated parking spot, which is number one. You'll call, whatever restaurant and says, hey, I'm at parking spot number one. And then the our tenant can come out and bring their food, grab and go, and causing less traffic. Because while foot traffic will change to some of the properties that we manage are all open air, so we have to worry about car traffic as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with.
Make a quick joke and then it's all yours, Brian. That's kind of like the old school diners with the waitresses on roller skates.
Get some roller skates.
Yeah.
I agree with what Paul said about people not wanting to go into their offices right away once things reopen. And Paul, would you agree that more and more people will want to work remotely? And if that is the case, what are landlords willing to do with all the leased space? I mean, since the tenants with a lot of space may not need as much space anymore, what are landlords willing to do, if anything?
Well, that is the $64,000 question. And the way that works, okay, I'm sorry, the $1 million question. So, okay, yes, one of the permanent changes that Tywan mentioned about permanent changes, and what we've seen and what they've, in terms of recent studies, they believe that remote working has, it's funny, I've seen two different studies. One said that 77% of the people who've now been remote working, really want to keep doing that. And not only that, they also want to change not only their hours, they want to change they only want to work 2 or 3 days a week. I mean, the definition of work is actually changing. It isn't just remote working. Remote working is actually, you know, the fulcrum of that. So, but remote working is not, first of all, not everyone is doing remote working. That's another thing. Will people want to come back? I do think that's a question. I've also seen a study that said people are working more collaboratively when they are remote working. They're working more collaboratively, very efficiently though, just as efficiently as they were in the office. So employers, interestingly enough, employers are now trusting, where they used to think that people, oh, you're remote working. Well, you know, how do we know you're really working? Right. So, but now they've realized, they've seen this working, and they say, you know, they trust their employers, and they say, wow, you know, you're working just as much as you were doing in the office. So first of all, employers are trusting their employees more, which is interesting. And
I think there's probably less small talk in the collaboration as well, because that's something that I've seen as well, where teams feel like they're not necessarily as cohesive, but they do like the work environment more from home.
well, that's one of the big things about remote working that they say is a loss, and that's the loss of, you know, standing around the water cooler and talking, and the social interaction. As we all know, working in an office is not just doing your work. There's a social factor that we all have to recognize there. Going into the office, you're dealing with people. People like people. People deal with people. And people will always want to deal with people. So there is that social interaction that people are missing. And what they call, you know, social adhesion, you know, like office adhesion. So they feel that, yes, people are working productively and collaboratively using remote Zoom, but they are also losing a bit of the, not loyalty, but the feeling of social adhesion to their company. They're losing a bit of that feeling about, wow, well, this is a great company, man. I work for Cushman and Wakefield, and I like Cushman and Wakefield, but it's not just the Zoom conferences I have with the people, with my colleagues. It's also being at Cushman and Wakefield and seeing their offices and, you know, sharing lunch with people. It's more than just the Zoom conferences. So, you know, the office is not just a place for work. And it's going to be fascinating to see, you know, people who want to come back and why they want to come back. And I don't know, there's a lot of questions about that.
That actually leads me to a follow-up to Brian's question, because I like that question a lot, Brian. And this kind of, to your point, do you think that landlords are going to see a need to offer incentives to get people to come back to the office? In the sense that, you know, well, this building offers this, I'd rather go to work to have that. You know what I mean?
Well, so I just want to chime in really quickly. Brian also mentioned about space, right? About what's happening and tenants and, you know, employees coming back. So here's what I've seen, you know, and this has been happening since, I'm going to say since even right before COVID really started. Right now, actually, it can be a good time or bad time for landlords and for tenants. And here's why. For landlords that has a property, and Brian, this is where landlords will look to guys like you and your expertise for in lease negotiations. Landlords that have a unit that's under market, or a tenant that's, this is the perfect time to renegotiate that lease. And if that tenant has a 10-year lease, now you can renegotiate that. So what I've been seeing, and this is, you know, the truth. A tenant actually called me or sent an email and said, you know what, we're out, take your keys, and we're gone, right? So that can be a perfect time for a landlord to actually either get that tenant out and maybe kind of reposition their portfolio, maybe ride this out a little bit, especially if it's in a prime area, to get another tenant in there. And for the actual tenant, this can be a prime time to possibly renegotiate that lease. I've been seeing tenants saying, all right, listen, for these 3 months, whether it's, you know, May, June, or July, we want a rent deferment, and to tack that on to the end of my 5-year lease, right? but honestly, what I've been seeing, not all, but some tenants have actually retained a broker or some type of tenant rep to actually do that work for them, right? Because they have either if they're a bigger tenant, if they have, you know, multiple locations, they've been doing that as well. So I think right now, what, you know, as a tenant, as a commercial tenant, you can look at this time to possibly renegotiate that lease. I live in Bed-Stuy, right? And all down Fulton Street, you kind of see some empty storefronts or stores that were in business, stores that are not up right now. And I think this will be the perfect time for a lot of those tenants possibly to start to renegotiate those leases. I know me personally, I'm interested to see what happens in Bed-Stuy along the Fulton Street corridor because I live 2 blocks from there, right? So I'm interested to see what happens in that space.
Let me ask you a question, Derek. I mean, in residential, we see lease breaks where someone would break the lease and then someone else would take over that existing lease for the remainder of the lease. Have you seen that in commercial?
I'll say no, I haven't seen that. What I've seen is tenants, they'll call me and say, listen, things are bad, things are rough, I can't pay my rent. We haven't seen any of those lease assumptions where they say I'm giving it to someone. I did see the sale of a store, right? So this was further out in Long Island. A tenant actually, they were in the middle of a sale and they sold their property to someone else. And I'm pretty sure they got it as a discount, especially if you look at the financials, right? Because when you're buying a property and you're doing the underwriting, you're looking at it, okay, sales are constant. And then boom, next thing you know, sales are like less than double. So you're like, uh-oh, right? What's happening there? But no, Brian, I haven't seen any like lease assumptions because I know for us in the commercial space, we have to look at the tenant. We have to look at, you know, if they've operated other properties before, if they've, you know, how they've performed on other properties. It's not just, hey, here's my Uncle Lou. Uncle Lou's been good to me. I'm just going to turn the business over to Uncle Lou. Good luck, Uncle Lou. You know, so for us, we kind of like to go through that underwriting.
Right. I want to thank Simone Pratt in the chat. She sent a link that there's empirical evidence. Productivity increases when you work remotely. So I want to thank Simone for that. You know, I plan on continuing. Yeah, I plan to continue to work remotely because I have a pretty efficient home office, and I do travel quite a bit. I do travel quite a bit, and I work remotely in other countries when I travel. But what I cannot do when I work remotely is I cannot network. Like I work from 2 storefront offices at Douglas Elliman, and people walk into the office. There's walk-in traffic. There's also agents who work from other offices who may work in the office at the virtual desk, and it's a networking opportunity. So I think the networking aspect would be missing if I did not come into the office. Otherwise, I can do my job as efficiently from home.
That reminds me, some of the ways that China is handling their post-COVID environment with regards especially to retail, where they have a situation where stores are, you know, to your question also, Brian, about repurposing space, the stores are creating these kind of shows where they're kind of almost like the home shopping network, where you have a personality who's selling their product to the people. And I think it's really interesting because there is that situation, as you and Paul have mentioned, about people may not want to go back to the office. But obviously there's benefits to going to the office. So yeah, so I just thought that was really interesting where you actually have these commercial spaces that are doing shows in the space, you know, so showcasing, you know, this is what you can do, like kind of like, you know, the guy with the Ginsu knives, but imagine doing that in the store with their setups there. And I just thought that was pretty interesting repurposing of the space where you're actually bringing the customers in to your space virtually and still able to kind of showcase what you're able to do. And then you can have a celebrity coming in and doing that for you. I thought that was just a really interesting way to go about it.
That's interesting. Yeah, because we're doing that on the residential side also. We're doing the virtual showing, you know, where we can go into
exactly right, yeah.
And we're doing virtual tours, and people can watch remotely as we're inside of the space. So that's
have you had a good reaction with the virtual tours? I mean, like, there's great virtual tours that are out there, and what's the experience been with you with the virtual tours?
Well, I've done professional tours with Matterport, and I've done tours with my iPhone or iPad, and it depends on the price point. And, some customers at a high end price point have to see it. At the lower end price point, and when I say low end, under $1 million, especially if they live out of town, they will sign a contract based on a virtual tour, and because they couldn't travel, right? And also renters will sign, not all, but the renters who are willing to sign a lease based on a video tour. So yeah.
And you know what, on the commercial side, Brian, it's definitely different. I'm still, showing and letting folks in. Really quickly, Derek, I'm sorry, and just before I move forward, I just wanted to kind of give thank you, just really quick. Simone Pratt, she's a friend of mine. She's she works for a marketing firm, and she does great with marketing as well. Also, we have Elton and Jacqueline. They're with Pillar to Post. They're home inspectors. They do great work. And also Sonia, she is the new executive director over at the Bed-Stuy YMCA. So she's doing some great work over there. But to get back to what I was saying is, on the commercial side is different, because most of the time, most spaces are not just move-in ready on commercial, right? You need time to do a build out. So tenants will often come and I'll have to show them, so I'll meet them on site, and they'll have to look at the space. Some of the spaces we show are pretty much white box, but most need work, right? So they need to come, an engineer needs to come, we need to configure this, we need to configure that, we have to get permits for stuff. So on the commercial side is definitely a little different as far as making sure that the space is ready. So virtual tours on the commercial space really doesn't do it justice, but I'm pretty sure, Brian, you've been, knocking it out the box for the last couple of years. So I'm pretty sure it's great on your end to actually have that virtual stuff. I wish that Matterport would work for a commercial space, but it just doesn't quite do it, as far as, especially if you have a larger scale tenant moving in.
Right, that's understood. Paul, what do you see coming in terms of changes to how buildings will control the flow of traffic in their stores or in office buildings, for that matter? I'm not sure you could speak to also how in residential buildings, how do you foresee a building property managers will allow agents to show and open house or private showings? How do you see that playing out?
Okay, so there's a few things there. First, commercially, we have our office in a Rudin building, and what they've done is they have a manual, and they've put markers, directional arrows on the floors, so that you can only walk in one direction. There are only certain numbers of people who can get in the elevator at one time. They actually have monitors who will be making sure, at least in the beginning, that no more than a certain number of people get in the elevator at one time. They've also taken, a lot of precautions. So they've cleaned all of their HVAC units and they're sanitized them. These are actual practical things that offices will do. They have hand sanitizers all over the place. They do cleaning, 3 times a day. So, they're definitely, and there's a cost to that, by the way. You can imagine the cost to that. So landlords are, on a commercial side, doing everything they can to at least give the optics and the appearance that people are safe and that you can come back to work. They're also limiting visitors. They're not saying you can have open houses anymore. So I'm sorry, going back to residential. Now I'm going to pivot to residential. Residential never closed, of course. Residential, it was always there. And it's so basically, in terms of residential, what they've had to do is figure out how to do the same things, but more safely. So you still, you can't use a Zoom, meeting to clean the hallways. There's certain things that have to be done manually by your staff, and those things you're just going to have to do everything you can. Again, the cleaning and the sanitizing and the gloves and PPE for your workers. But those things will always have to be done by human beings. In terms of showings, it's interesting that you said, I'm curious to hear about that, Brian, that the certain price points, because I've heard that it's been challenging. Leasing has been the most challenging thing right now.
What you mean, rentals and residential rentals? I find it's very robust. I did a lot of rentals over the last 2 or 3 months.
Really?
And I don't see, I don't, not much in the way of price concession. I'm sure at the higher end, you're going to see rent concessions. I haven't seen a lot of the rent concessions. I had maybe 1 or 2, but mostly renters are willing to pay a full fee. I can't get into commissions, but yeah. And also, my rentals are moving, whether the landlord is showing or I'm doing, there's a virtual tour up. Maybe at the higher end, again, it depends on where, and depends on if the tenant, depends on the building, whether the building will allow someone in, even if the super can show. But my rentals have been moving. Are you hearing otherwise from other agents?
This is just things I've been reading, but look, I've got the boots on the ground, so I defer to you.
Markets are local. It depends on where. The people I've seen people on Zoom panels who downtown who say who say on the panel. I hear agents are saying they're doing deals at this time, and I just don't believe it. That may be true for their market, but in the markets I work with, my target market, Upper Manhattan, Bronx, Westchester, we're seeing bidding wars. Things are moving. A lot of people are coming out in the Bronx, and
right, that migration they're talking about. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the prices are holding. Prices are holding. I don't see huge price reductions. It's business as usual. So
Yeah, and to add to what Paul said, and Brian, your question as far as what procedures are changing inside of buildings. So I have a property manager buddy who manages a couple residential buildings in the city, and what they've done in their front security desk, they put up plexiglass now, right? So now they have plexiglass there where the greeter would be there, and now if you come in, there's plexiglass, and they have SOP, the standard of procedures manual there for how things are going to move forward. And I know right now, if you are a cleaning company, you are doing great right now. Man, how did I get into that, right? So in our buildings, we have what's called high touch points. And those high touch points are the front doors, the back doors, elevator buttons, right? Things that we don't really understand and know that we use so much. Think about how many times an elevator button gets pushed, especially if there's 1 or 2 elevators in that whole building, right? So
that brings me to a good point. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted, because I think you can address it as well, the idea of contactless technology, right? Because I think there's already now buildings where you only press, you go to the keypad and you just say where you're going to, you don't really touch anything else. And I think a keypad's a lot easier thing to clean. This cuts down the touch points. But then I also read an article that was talking about maybe in some of these office buildings, you'll see more doors that open without you having to say anything, without you having to touch it. Like you don't have a doorknob, you just have, say, a sensor that recognizes this person and opens the door, or voice activated, kind of like an Alexa in the office.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I'm not really a fan of the don't touch elevators. So I cannot tell you how many times I've walked into one thinking I was going to one floor and it lets me out on a totally different floor for me not paying attention. But yeah, you're right. I think we'll start to see more of that where you don't have to touch things as much. You'll start to see those different procedures, not just in commercial buildings, but also residential buildings. And like Paul said, for me, yes, I was very busy and I'm still busy during this time frame, but most of our businesses, our nail salons and salons just opened back up. They weren't there. So I was busy with rent concessions and tenants saying, hey, things are tough. But on the residential side, right, for showings and what Brian does, those residential property managers were also busy as well because people are now home 24/7. And when you're home 24/7, things break more, right? The doorknob, think how many times people are walking back and forth, right? So you also have to think about for the residential property managers, now you have tenants that are home 24/7, right? So I'm pretty sure that those call lines are just blowing up with different issues and complaints from the residents.
Hi, speaking of plexiglass, a question for you and Paul. What do you see as the future of co-working space in New York City? Is that going to continue? Do you see a change in office design? The plexiglass or cubicles coming back? What do you foresee?
Paul, you can go first.
You know what? I was hoping that we'd have someone from Knotel here to answer that question. Fortunately, I really can't speak to that. I can't speak to that. So I mean, I don't want to just spitball it, but
Well, I actually did see something that was done with a building out in Denmark. It was actually it's an office space where they redesigned the space so that you don't have cubicles necessarily, but you have kind of stations where for one situation you could have two people facing each other, so they're actually a certain distance apart. But then you could also have longer tables where you don't necessarily have that open space anymore, but you have, instead of people sitting together in a row, they're like opposite each other. So one person sitting here, the other person sits opposite them in the next seat, and then here and then over. So you have a situation where they're not breathing the same air. So I think that's one of the things, and that was an American company. I think I'm blanking on the company now, but that was one of their buildings in Denmark. So I think that's one of those things we can expect to carry over into New York City, is maybe a redesign that's not a completely drastic redesign. You just kind of adjust the spaces a lot, because I thought the open office space was going to go away, but then I was just reading this article that says, even COVID-19 can't kill the open office layout. So I think that definitely is going to be something that we're going to continue seeing, just a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that, so I used to be at a working space, right? Shared co-working space. And like Paul said, it really leads to the fact of people kind of working together. That's where you network. I think Brian mentioned that. Co-working spaces are really great places to network. I think, for us as commercial landlords, so there's two sides to it, right? You have the financial aspect. So I know right now, because the smaller tenants are pulling out of their leases, then that means that the financials of these larger co-working spaces, people get worried, right? So if you're a co-working space and you have 50 tenants and 35 of them pull out, right? That's kind of your cash flow. So then you're going to start to say, okay, maybe I need to downsize or resize, whatever the case is. But I think moving forward, when these build outs happen and in these spaces, you're going to start to see a lot more hand sanitizing stations. So that's for one. And I think that these co-working spaces will provide PPE there on site. I went to a showing the other day, and this broker was really good. Before we even came in the house, she bought these little blue booties that we put on our feet, and she was like, and I went in, and she said, the person I was with, all right, you have to stay out. So I think we'll possibly see PPE much more available at some of these co-working spaces, and a lot of hand sanitizing stations. And also, like you said, Derek, the elevators that I do not like, that, takes you to a different floor, you didn't push the button.
Yeah, I think, in fact, I would actually probably say that, having worked in WeWorks before, I think that those layouts are probably more conducive to what office space would want to move towards moving forward, because those emphasize, co-working, people working together, but in smaller groups, but then also areas that are common that are specific for one person. Now, they'll have like a telephone booth or like a little private area where you can kind of sit and be alone. So I actually think that the co-working spaces are probably better equipped to move forward, and we might see regular offices look more like those in terms of format and layout and design. Again, I think the arrows and the floors are great as well, because, with co-working spaces, they're kind of, you have your own space, and so everyone's sharing these often narrow hallways. So I think those might have to change, where you have to format, okay, this is a one-way hallway now, and things like that. But I do think that the co-working spaces are probably in a good position to move forward compared to like the older office layouts. So I think that actually might see more of that.
So Brian, and Derek, since you mentioned that, so a lot of these co-working spaces, they also have like food areas, right? So those food areas, I would say, are high touch point areas as well, right? So like you mentioned, I've been there. Yeah, exactly. And for me, they had, when I was there, they had, cereal and breakfast and food. So, me, I was there all the time, right? So, as we move forward, Derek, what do you think will be the shift in those co-working spaces that have food areas? And the co-working spaces, they're known to kind of bring a community feel. So every Wednesday night, they'll have Wednesday pizza or something like that, right? So
what do you see in that collaboration?
Yeah.
And so I think what you'll probably see is an increase, again, in technology, because I was just reading a press release for this new technology that came out. I believe it's called SW2 from this company, TES. And so what it is, and they have things like this in China that everyone has on their phone. but they have this technology now with this SW2 where you can actually monitor everyone who's coming into the building to see
wow.
what their body temperature is. And then there's
Oh,
like this
wow.
quick survey. Who have you interacted with? Where have you been? What have you done? And so if you've done anything in the building previously, they can actually then identify who you've interacted with to see what your risk level is. And then they may not let you in the building. So I think you
Wow.
might have these situations where people don't even get in under certain circumstances. That'll kind of narrow the risk in the high touch areas. But then also, like for retail, you're seeing things like people talking about shopping by appointment. So you're only in the room with the person who's doing the
Yeah.
shopping, and then they're going to wipe everything down and stuff after that. I think you'll see a lot of things on the front end, so the people coming in, are less
Yeah.
likely to be spreading anything.
So Ty and Paul, what retail trends are you seeing right now? I mean, what type of retail have proven to be do well in this market, or have proven to survive? What are you seeing in terms of retail stores that are the type of businesses that do well, that are surviving?
Yeah, so I've seen, so I'll give two locations. So, again, I live in Bed-Stuy. There are certain businesses in Bed-Stuy who obviously that you would go there and you would have a good time and you would socialize, but that never closed down. They transitioned. So there's a pizza place on the corner of where I live. They do some of the best brick oven pizza that you could imagine. But they've been resilient. They've just, Grubhub and Uber Eats. They've been able to sustain themselves just based off of that. From what I've seen, and even some of my larger commercial tenants. So I have a couple, the shopping malls that I manage. They have healthy lifestyle salads and things like that. They've been doing well. They've even been doing so well. And I'll say this. So there's a term that we do call a license agreement, right, for common areas. So being the fact that people cannot gather, these traditional spaces want to gather, have outside seating in the parking lot on the sidewalk. So for me as a property manager, doing these license agreements went from maybe doing a couple a year to doing like 20 in 1 month, right? Because now as we have parking spaces, these food establishments that serve healthy options, again, the key word has been the healthy option places. They've been doing very well. They've been resilient, whether they're doing online orders, again, Grubhub, Uber Eats, or Seamless. They've been doing very well, and they did not close down. Your traditional tenants, such as your Home Depots, your Targets, they've been doing well. They never closed down. They didn't lose steam. I would go to my shopping malls just to do inspections, and it would be 100, 200 cars all gathered in front of the Target or in front of some of these other kind of, even Family Dollars have been doing well, right? Because people need essential service and people need essential products, and those businesses have those essential products for sale. So they've been doing well from what I've seen. The other tenants, not so much, but they've been doing really good.
That's great. Because I live in Astoria, and it's a similar situation. Like I think like some of these neighborhoods that are a little bit younger or trendier, and it's probably similar in Harlem as well, I would venture, is that people are used to getting takeout, right? So it's not a big shift for a restaurant to say, okay, now I'm not holding people in. Restaurants in these kind of neighborhoods are probably, I don't know if they're doing better, but when you're not paying a wait staff and you're having only a moderate decrease in the what you're making on your food, probably not doing poorly at all. I would say, just from the way, I mean, like I could still get food at 2 a.m. in some places in this neighborhood. So it's pretty interesting about that.
Yeah, I agree. And same thing here in Bed-Stuy. We have a couple places here in Bed-Stuy that initially they lost a little steam. But then I'm, walking down Fulton Street and they have lines outside. I'm like, wow, that's the place to be, So I guess food establishments, Brian, I think the ones that were able to shift, the ones that had a social media presence beforehand, they fared very well. I think this time has also been for places that did not have a really good social media presence. They said, "Oh, we need to get one," but they're kind of in the thick of it, right? So, and obviously that social media will drive foot traffic to these establishments because people now have people wanting to get out, right? Even if it's to get out to get a burrito or something like that. So in my opinion, the food establishments have been doing okay.
I imagine businesses that have shifted to accepting, Apple Pay and delivery services, right? Would do well as well. So can we open up to some questions from the audience in the chat? Anyone have any questions at this time?
Hey, Brian, it's Anthony. Brian?
I'm here.
Yeah, I was wondering, the companies that, I'm not sure if you're seeing it, are you seeing a lot of those new corporations, those new companies that do take your temperature, that do look at you before, just to see if you have COVID or your temperature is high? Do you see a lot of those new systems being,
I have not seen
updated? And also, no, you haven't seen that? That would
I have,
be a great stock.
yeah.
Great stock to
Open
invest
house,
in.
right? You gotta have a bunch of people coming in.
I probably will. You'll probably see it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you can.
You probably see it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a company that I work with called Delios, and that company, and this is good for Ty, and they do a lot of commercial, and I'm going to put you in touch with them, Ty. They do ventilations. They're really busy, like those cleaning companies. The ventilation companies for the new air filters and all the new buildings, booming. They're booming. I can't even get them to do a webinar because they're just so busy. So I see a lot of that, a lot of those companies going into a lot of these buildings and of course putting brand new filters into their buildings, attaching brand new filtration systems. So I was just wondering about the new, before you get to the elevator, if there's a system in place where they stop you. But you haven't seen any of that happen yet. But I guess in Europe it is happening.
It is. It's happening in Europe and in China. So I think that'll increase because New York City, we've been very, very precautious, and we're technically not yet. So I think once we have that, once we have more of the phases gone through, I think you'll definitely see more of that. So like, for example, let's go back to China again, because they have, in China, obviously it's a communist country. They're very kind of closed in. They have like one social media thing. It's called WeChat, right? And so that's their Instagram, their Twitter, their Facebook. It's all their things. But then also all their banking is tied to their phone as well. So all of these things work through WeChat or through another app on their phone. So everyone's walking around with these detection systems in their pocket. Whereas with here, I don't think we'll be able to do that. So I think it will be like what you said, Anthony, you're gonna have to stop people and administer those or have something that's contactless. Because I think the SW2 is also contactless. But so I think you're definitely going to see that. And that actually does parlay into one of the questions that we just got. So I'll just go ahead and read out the whole question. It says, do you think there will be an increase in offices moving to a hoteling or a hot seat structure where they can come into a beautiful office space but no assigned office or queue? Some employees may not be comfortable coming in, and the business is increasing operational efficiencies with a reduced footprint. So
who's that from, Derek? Who's that from?
Let's see.
That's from Simone.
Simone, that's from Simone.
Thank you, Simone.
Gets the gold star today. So if anybody else wants to weigh in, they can. Otherwise, I have an opinion on that. But yeah.
So that was a great question. And just to put that out there, Simone's a fellow Bed-Stuy person too. So.
No, from what I've read about that is that again, there's an attitude issue that people are more frightened, frankly, than and that to go to a desk that they don't know who's been there before. Even though if you have those disposable desk mats, which they're going to be putting out, people are going to be very hesitant about going to a desk that's not theirs, that they didn't clean themselves. So I don't know. I think it could go both ways on that one.
That's a great point, because I thought that made sense, but then you said that, and now I'm on your side.
To add to that, I know a lot of companies are going to implement what's called staggered schedules, right? So in a staggered schedule, you'll have, so let's say in an office, you have 10 folks, 10 employees to one office space. You'll have, 5 come in one day and 5 come in the next day. And then but what they're doing is they're going to leave maybe hour or 2 hour increments in between. So these companies could come in and do a deep cleaning in between each and every shift change. So that's why I said a lot of these cleaning companies are going to do amazing. They're going to do well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think with the cleaning, but then also going back to what you're saying about the staggered, there are certain, I think, not entire industries, but I think certain people that work in the office that may not have to be at the office at all, right? So like if you're a programmer, you really don't need to be in the office. And like, if you guys have ever worked with programmers, they're all sitting there with their headphones on. They're used to communicating via message, and they're really just kind of in their own headspace. So you might actually see more room to create more social distancing by allowing certain employees to work from home, or have that staggered situation. But I think that might be one of the solutions is, hey, just let the programmers work from home, and now we have more space that we can reposition and give more distance for everybody who's in the office.
Everyone may not have that luxury. So for example, property managers, I still think it's important for property managers to be in the office at least once, right, to communicate with their staff and their employees. But then property managers also too are out traveling a lot, going to, if they have multiple sites, whether it's through the city or anywhere else. So if you can do that, great.
Some of the larger firms, hey, this is Alton Andrews. Some of the larger firms are also doing some interesting things, just different iterations of what you just stated, whereas they're going with, they're breaking their teams into quadrants, let's say 4 sets. And we'll have one team come in for the full week so that they're comfortable that, at least they've done it the first day, they've cleaned up the first day and they're comfortable there. And then the following week, just they do 1 week a month, so to speak. And that's a little bit more comfortable, but it's all along the same mindset.
That's interesting. I like that idea, though. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I see my wife doing that, Elton. Yeah, she works for a big company and same setup. That's the way I'm seeing it right now as well. Hey guys, this was great. I was really excited, and I'm really proud. Really excited about it. I know we're going to be speaking once a month, and but we're going to be doing it a lot more than that. I feel there'll probably be maybe sometimes it might be 4 times a month.
Before that question, I just really wanted to thank Paul. Thank you, Paul, for coming, and thank you for tuning in and allowing us to kind of pick your brain about with your experience, and thank you for representing IREM. So thank you very much, Paul. Thank you.
If I may, I know we're going to be really quick. I just do want to give another shout out to IREM, and for very practical things they have. If you go to irem.org and you go to From the Front Lines, they have fabulous, absolutely free podcasts on every subject in the world on COVID and how to deal with it. They're absolutely free podcasts. So irem.org/learning, and on every topic you could imagine, it'll be very, very helpful.
I think we're good. Looks like we've satisfied all the questions. It was a great conversation. I want to thank everybody for joining us, for participating. For this being our first time, Brian and Ty, I think it was a great conversation. Paul, you were excellent. Really appreciate your expertise there. Anthony, again. So thank everybody for joining us. Thanks everybody who helped bring this together.
Thanks,
Anthony,
Derek. Thank you, Paul.
So everyone taking time out of work now, go back to work.
Right, exactly.
Thanks, guys.